morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our learning this morning is sponsored by Sue and Ray White in honor of the bar mitzvah of their grandson, Yedidya Langer, this Shabbos. Thank you so much, Sue and Mazel Tov, and you should have much nachas from Yedidya and your entire lovely family. Thank you very much. Chapter 15, verse 11. We began discussing this pasuk yesterday. The pasuk says, "Ki lo yachtal avyon mikerav haaretz," that poor people will not be removed from the land. There's always going to be poor people. That's what it sounds like it's saying. Now, it's difficult because elsewhere in the Torah says that if Jewish people as a whole are serving God as they're supposed to, so they won't have any poverty. So which one is it? Is it that we could get to the point where there's no poverty, or is it that there's no such thing as there being no poverty? It seems to be a really out-and-out contradiction. So the Ramban says there are numerous mefarshim who explain that what we're basically saying is that ain't going to happen. In other words, yes, if the Jewish people really, really get it together in a national way, then we will no longer have poverty. But God says, "Lo yachtal avyon mikerav haaretz." It's don't hold your breath. Not that the principle isn't true, but God's saying it's not going to. The Jewish people are never going to get it together to that extent. That's what the Ramban starts off with. Now, so Ramban on Pasuk Yud Aleph, it's about 5 lines into the Ramban, beginning with the phrase "Ve'eino nachon ladati." I don't think that's correct, says the Ramban. Ki haTorah tirmos b'mesha asid lios. The Torah alludes to things. Avalo yisnabe aleim b'feirish lo yikaimu haTorah la'olam. The idea of a pasuk in the Torah saying, "Nah, that pasuk, nah," it's not going to be. It's a very strange thing. The Chalila, rak b'derech azhara yaskir hadavar. It makes sense for it to be understand that it very well might be that Klal Yisrael never gets together, but to say that God is saying a definitive statement, that assurance that I gave you, if you do X, then I'll do Y, it's just never going to happen. Strange thing to say that. So the Ramban says the way to understand the pasuk is not that there'll always be poor people, not that, but that you cannot say poor people will be eliminated from the world forever. In other words, that's a different statement. The other Mefarshim said there's always going to be poor people. The Ramban says that the pasuk is saying never say never. Never say that there's never going to be poor people ever. You understand? It's like the other way around. Because of the assurance elsewhere in the Torah that if the Jewish people observe all the mitzvahs, they won't have anyone poor. Amar avol yadati kol yiyu kol hadoros kol yimei olam kulam shomrim kol hamitzvah ashel star kol tzavos alavyo. According to the Ramban, what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying here in the pasuk is, even though of course it's true that if we all get it together, we won't have poor people. There's going to be times that we don't have it all together. So it needs to be an operational system for how you're going to deal with poor people, because there will be times that there are poor people. It's a very different shot than what the Ramban started with. Ki ulai b'ktsas hayamim yimtza evyon yimatze evyon v'ani mitzav chalav im yimatze. Because it's possible that sometimes there will be someone poor. V'yamar b'kerev haaretz lirmos hakol ha'yishuv ki havtacha shlo yeh baru evyon ba'aretz asher Hashem Elokeinu nosein lanu nachalon l'kaim shem kol ha'mitzvos. The Ramban makes an additional point that it says a poor person will not be removed from among the land, from within the land. What land is that? The Ramban says the land means the world. So another point is, first of all, we're not saying that there'll never be a poor person. But then the other point is, even the assurance that when Klal Yisrael is doing things well, there won't be poor people, that probably is in Israel, there won't be poor people. In God's blessed land, if everyone in Klal Yisrael is doing the right thing. So that's another point the Ramban makes. Okay, let's go on to verse 19. Excuse me, verse 19. All of the firstborn animals among cattle and sheep that are male, you should sanctify to Hashem. Lo savod b'chor shorecha v'lo sagors b'chod sonecha. When you have a firstborn animal, an animal that's kosher, don't work the land with it, don't shear the sheep. The Kohen, Rashi explains, the Kohen partakes of the animal. You bring it to the base of Mikdash, you present it to the Kohen, and the Kohen partakes of the animal. I don't know if anyone is keeping score, but we've really gotten into a point where it feels like it's random mitzvos being gone through right now. Question number one. Question number two, the Parsha ends off, people are probably very familiar with these psukim because this is the laning on one of the days of Yom Tiv. I'm sure people have noticed, particularly for us diaspora Jews, we have to come up with laning for a second day each Yom Tiv. There are various Yom Tovim that there's not an obvious laning for every day of Yom Tiv that's conducive for the Yom Tiv. So this is one of these catch-all Yom Tiv laning days that goes to the holidays. And we read this different Yom Tovim. But what's interesting is in the following psukim, which we haven't gotten to yet, but either we'll get to them today or you'll hear them tomorrow. The Torah doesn't give the dates for the Yom Tovim. The Torah kind of refers to Pesach as like the spring Yom Tiv, for example. It's a little bit strange. Why is that? So really interesting Sforno over here. Sforno on Pasuk Yud Tes. Kol HaBechor. Acher Shabir Minei Chesed B'Tvua V'Maser Ani. So the Sforno says, in this set of mitzvos, we had an idea of how to bring kindness to our crops, because we had the idea of Maser Ani, taking a tenth of our produce and giving it to the poor. Ubemos V'Shmitas Ksafim V'Atzdaka. And then we spoke about kindness, not just in our crops, but kindness in our finances, because we spoke about the idea of giving to the poor, not necessarily just giving crops to the poor, but Dei Machzoro, we spoke about the other day, whatever a person is missing. We did not discuss these psukim, but the Torah talks about freeing the Jewish slave. That when the Jewish slave is freed, there's a mitzvahs aseh d'oraisa, there's a mitzvah from the Torah for his past owner to give him very generous gifts upon his being freed. So it's another level of generosity. The odds are that if someone is a Jewish slave, they had financial difficulties, right? It's either that they had such a cash flow issue that they just sold themselves as a slave to another Jew, or they stole, which is not a good thing, but then they didn't have enough assets to pay off the theft, so they had to be sold as an Eved Ivri, as a means of paying off the theft. So this is also presumably a person on hard financial times. Bir mitzvos asher bohen hodol l'kel yisala. So after we've gone through these mitzvos of chesed, tithing for the poor from the crops, giving tzedakah from your money, giving generously to the eved, to the Jewish slave whom you free, now we go on to other types of mitzvos that are about gratitude to God. V'hein, matan habechoros, the way we treat the firstborn animal. Haroy lebale hamikna lahoros ki miyado hamikna lahu. What's the idea of giving a firstborn animal to the Kohen in the Beis HaMikdash? Again, we don't relate very well to animals as assets. Some of us relate to them well as pets. Some of us don't. But the idea is that a person who owns livestock as a business, you have a lot of animals, you breed animals, you have more animals. The idea that a firstborn animal goes to God is a remarkable reminder that whatever I have is from God. And then, after the mitzvah of the firstborn animal, the Chag HaMatzos, then the Torah talks about Pesach, Lahodos al HaGeula. That's our opportunity to give thanks to God for the redemption, B'Zevach HaPesach, U'B'Matzos. By the bringing of the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach and the eating of the matzah. V'al ha'aviv v'omer hatznufa. And then we have the Korban Omer that's brought on the second day of Pesach, and that's all about thanks to God for that year's crops. V'chag ha'shavuos lahodos al shavuos chukos katzir sheshamar lanu. Then Shavuos comes. So it's a famous thing. Different places in the Torah refers to the holidays based on the agricultural seasons. So as far as that's the idea by Shavuos, that we're giving thanks to God for the harvest that we recently had. V'chag ha'asif l'hodos al ha'asif. And then Sukkot is associated with that harvest. We thank God for that. And on each of these holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, there's a special korban that we bring to God, a gift. Ka'amro v'lo yereas pnei Hashem reikam. Says in the pasuk we shouldn't come empty-handed before God. Ulazeh lo hiskir b'hem be'ezeh chodesh u'bekam b'chodesh yiyu. Avol hiskir ha'aviv ha'shavuos v'aseh. So Sforno says we're talking about these Yom Tovim in these following pasuk when we don't give dates. I mean, the Yom Tov is a specific date. He says, no, the Torah tells us about the dates elsewhere in the Torah. This is something else. It's bringing it home in a different way, that if we think the Yom Tovim are all about the history lesson of what happened to the Jews in the desert and upon leaving Egypt and so on and so forth, that's part of it. That's a very important part of it, but it's not all of it. Because each of the Yom Tovim carry with them a way to give thanks to God for our current successes. And therefore, in these psukim says this for now, the Torah just refers to the Yom Tovim in a seasonal type of way. I repeat, that's not to the exclusion of looking at them in a historical way, but it's giving another perspective. But the Sforno says that if you look at it from this perspective, the Yom Tovim are part of a chain throughout the year of mitzvos of gratitude to God. I just thought this was just a really interesting Sforno, kind of linking things together at the end of the parsha. Let's jump now to chapter 16, verse 1. Shamores chodesh haviv, guard the spring month. V'yasisa Pesach l'Hashem Elokecha, and bring a korban Pesach to Hashem your God. Ki b'chodesh haviv, because in this month of the spring, hotziacha Hashem Elokecha mitzrayim leila. God took you out of Egypt at night in the springtime, and therefore in the springtime and all subsequent years we bring a korban Pesach. Ramban and Pasuk Aleph, Shamores Chodesh Aviv, Mitzvahs Haragolim Mevueres, Kikvar Yizkira. The Ramban says we know about the Yom Tovim. We've already discussed it earlier in the Chumash. V'nei b'Toras Kohanim, Hizkir B'Oinin Akarbanos, V'Krav Tamishel Hashem. And by the way, besides the observance of the holidays, in Parshas Pinchas, in Parshas Emor, it talks about the special offerings brought on these Yom Tovim. V'kan lo yaskirim klal. So we don't talk about the Yom Tovim we've spoken about already. And it doesn't even talk about the korbanos here. Avol yazir es Yisrael lalos bohem el hamakom asher yivchav l'smoach l'fanav. That which we're being urged here specifically is to be ola rega. Again, at the times of the Beis HaMikdash. That when these Yom Tovim come around, we need to go to the Beis HaMikdash. Ki kasher tziva shiyav maser shein v'nei Hashem v'chein ha'bechor v'yochlem sham makom asher yivchav Hashem. So the Ramban has a different shot in the thread of mitzvahs here. So it spoke about Maser Sheni. We did discuss that earlier in the week. It's in certain years, taking a tenth of your crops and bringing them to Yerushalayim and eating them in Yerushalayim. And then we spoke, as we read this morning, about the Bechoros, about the firstborn animals that you're supposed to bring to the Kohen in Yerushalayim. Hosef Levoyer now adds, Ki od chayavin sheyavo kulam te Hashem. There's another reason that we all need to come to Hashem. Yerushalayim, excuse me. V'yachogu lefanav b'shlosha regalim, to celebrate in Yerushalayim on the 3 holidays, v'lesloach b'shlamim she'akriv lefanav, and to rejoice with God with the korban shlamim offerings that are brought. So it's a different pshat than this forno. We don't get into the details over here about what the dates are for these holidays. We're just referring to them in shorthand because it's discussed elsewhere. But the thread of connection, as Sforno says, the thread of connection is because it's another mitzvah of thanksgiving to God, like the firstborn animals. Ramban says the thread of connection, it's another mitzvah to go to Yerushalayim, like Maser Sheni and the firstborn animals. So just an interesting point over here. And we also discussed the Ramban and other Mefarshim's perspective about what's meant in the pasuk, that the poor will not be removed from the land forever.